most basic characteristics of an organism would need to have for you to consider it alive?
Well, that's a great question. Um,
I would say that there are different layers, because if you talk about the life of an individual, that's one thing, but we can also talk about the life of a species. So that's another, like almost like a different time frame. And you can also talk about in cosmic terms, like a big cycle.
Do we define life biologically? Do we define it psychologically? Do we define life only in terms of some sort of social relationship? Defining life is something that even contemporary science doesn't do very well necessarily. We still don't know how to create life. We don't know about the origin of life. We know how life changes. We know, of course, evolution. We know our place in the larger physical universe to some extent, but we still don't quite know how it all came together to create life as we know it. And so, within different religions, there certainly are attempts to, again, find meaning and purpose in that life, but oftentimes not so much to ask the question, where does it come from?
What I teach in my introductory level cell and molecular class is that scientists kind of agree on a set of criteria that defines living things, and there's 7 things that my students have to memorize that defines a living thing. So the 7 things that all living things need to have to be considered alive would be homeostasis, organization, metabolism, growth, adaptation or evolution, response to environment, and reproduction. So those are like the 7 things that most biologists would say something needs to be able to do to be alive.
So like, what is a species? People think they have a good handle on that. Well, a species is an animal that can breed with other members of its species and produce fertile offspring. And so they're like, that's the definition, that's what it is. That is one definition. That is the biological definition for species level cutoff from a different species within the same genus. But there's morphological species concepts. So there's nuance, there's gradients, there's a bit of a spectrum, and humans are uncomfortable with that. We like to have hard cutoffs for different things. And so certainly the species concept is a good idea and makes sense, but you do have to allow for the fact that it is us applying a line or a name to something to make ourselves more comfortable. And the same thing applies to life in general. So as a biological concept for what is alive, the line is drawn above virus. So it needs to have a cell. It is a single-celled organism, good, you're alive. But viruses don't get counted.
I think that the list of 7 things maybe shouldn't be taken as definitive. Like, I think viruses are very important to study and learn about, and also maybe shouldn't be considered non-living because they reproduce and evolve. Even things we do consider alive can be exceptions to that list. So there are some bacteria, chlamydia is an example, that we can't grow chlamydia in a lab on its own. It has to be associated with a host cell. So technically it doesn't meet all the criteria in that list either, but we do still consider that a bacterium, which is considered alive.
Like we were talking about, from a biological point of view, life is life. It's just when humans start describing things that they ascribe value to certain parts of life or certain types of life and not others.
I do feel the definition for life, as I mentioned before, it's us drawing a line. So that line is subject to change. So now we're entering the technological age, really, and people are starting to experiment around with AI and stuff. At what point does an artificial construct become sentient? So it is an interesting problem that I don't have an answer for right now. At some point down the line, I'm sure I'll have to revise my personal definition of what is life to include something that does not have DNA.
You know, there are places that life occurs even on Earth that are very extreme. So extremophiles, things that live in very acidic, very hot, or very dry, or very salty parts of even just our Earth are interesting for that reason, because they give us examples of ways that life can thrive in otherwise very challenging environments, but environments that are very common elsewhere in the solar system and elsewhere in the galaxy, and other galaxies, of course.
Kind of the hard part is we're trying to search for life outside of Earth, because we're basically stuck looking for things that we understand about ourselves. And so there might be something out there that's totally different that we may not even recognize as being alive from our way of looking at things.
I think, you know, we have proof that life can form in the way that we see it around us. So there's good reason to look for that kind of life. But I know that people who spend time thinking about this also consider non-carbon based options.
As we think about like life as a broader term, or looking for life outside of Earth, I do think it's important to recognize that there will be exceptions, and that maybe for something to be alive, it should have some of the things on that list. Like that can be used as a baseline, but maybe you can mix and match from those things and kind of have a broader range, some shades of gray in defining life.
We have so much language around life, like bring forth life, lost a life, you know, as if life is something that you could lose, you know, give life to something, take a life. And so just in a linguistic aspect, that was interesting to me, how we look at life. And I got the sense that life wasn't so much something that you had. It wasn't like a commodity that you had, as much as something that you were inside.
You know, there's a lot of work that's being done right now, really since the 1960s, along those lines of looking at the entire Earth, the ecozone, or even the entire universe as like an organism in some way.
I think there's a lot of really interesting research coming out that things are more interconnected than we may have previously thought. So there's a lot of interesting work, getting back to fungi again, about common mycorrhizal networks that connect the roots of different trees, even different trees of different species, and they can transfer nutrients and information through those mycorrhizal networks. Some people call it the wood wide web. So it's showing that that's a really important interaction in a lot of forests.
The idea of the land as a body is ancestral. You know, like you can see that in all many traditions and indigenous teachings today. People, elders, communities, scholars, poets, they always talk about the land as a body. All these creeks and all these rivers come together and they are flowing, you know. Some of them are flowing toward the Atlantic, some of them are flowing west to go down to the Gulf of Mexico. And the Cherokee, I don't remember the name, the word exactly, but they call these rivers the long men. And it's a long man that is, you know, expanding or extending, you know, his body from the mountain to the sea.
One thing, of course, I heard all the time, because I was in the Amazon, which is that water is life. Their whole lives were determined by the river and the rain and the seasons. It really was water is life, you know. It's like, it's going to tell us when we're going to leave, it's going to tell us when we're going to come back, it's going to tell us how our crops do, how our animals do. It brings us, you know, all of our plant life is from water. So that was a little bit different. So connected to water. Life was very much connected to water.
So the idea of a body and the land it crosses many traditions.
And of course, if you think of the universe as being alive, it certainly changes our relationship as human beings to that universe. We become a part of a living thing rather than just a living thing separate in our own way.
Someone's life is not their own, that it's something that they're going to be pouring into their children, and then their children are going to be pouring into their children. And that's what I mean about having this idea of yourself as something coming from something and going towards something. I think changes an idea of life, of what life is.
Why do we value some species over other species? Because people like to ascribe value to things. It's really all our own construct of that. I mean, you've all heard of the charismatic megafauna that everyone wants to donate money to the World Wildlife Federation to preserve, but no one really thinks about, like trying to conserve rare fungi. Partly because they're not as attractive, but they're also not as well known.
Well, I think everyone has a bias in terms of valuing more complex living organisms potentially more. It's not that I don't think microbes are really valuable, but on an individual level, I am every day autoclaving, so like killing by steam and boiling temperatures millions of bacteria, whereas I am very careful. For example, if I see a squirrel on the road when I'm driving, I panic and swerve to avoid it. Yeah, I think there is a bias, even in somebody who really cares about really tiny single-celled organisms in terms of wanting to keep them alive.
When you think about this conversation, I always immediately think about the sun. Because the sun is that force, for astronomers and physicists and biologists, is the force that provides, that allows the possibility of life. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what color of your skin, what gender, what time in history. Is the sun, and without the sunrise, that's it.
We take it for granted because everything's alive. The planet is green from space with everything living on the surface of it and in the waters. So it just seems simple, but when you really dig into it, all the things that have to happen, the distance from the sun to make sure it's not too hot, not too cold, you have to have plentiful water. There's a lot of things that go on to support life, but by the same token, because it is so tenuous in how it comes to be and how it persists, we should, not take it for granted and maybe take better care of the planet and ourselves and each other.